Finding out that unity does not mean we have to agree on everything. And unity, I learned is, we can have different opinions, different outlooks, and still come to a place of understanding and not, bite each other's heads off.
If you continue using should, you're essentially in resistance with reality. Because every time you say should, it is you want things to be different than they actually are right now, right here. And so that's paradoxical, doesn't make any sense.
And part of cultivating that self-love is finding my tribe, finding people I can relate to that have been through similar experiences. Shame thrives in isolation. Guilt thrives in isolation. Being able to come to a place where I'm not isolated, I'm doing activities that do bring some joy, because shame can really crush the possibility of joy.
This is the Doubtless Podcast, here to help you change from a state of doubt and insecurity towards a more calm, confident, and doubtless self. I'm your host, coach and psychologist Julian, and my guests are remarkable, ambitious humans who share their stories of doubtful moments, of their insecurities, and how that shaped their successes today. Good morning, Eric. I heard for you, it's right now morning, early on, so beginning of the day. And I'm really excited that you took the time to speak to me about a very fascinating topic about combining martial art and sort of psychology, the mind, maybe even going to addiction. And so that's something I'm very curious about, how it's going to unfold. You also wrote a book about it, which we will go even more into depth later. And for now, I'm just really curious myself about it. That's why I'm looking forward to our conversation. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Julian, and good afternoon your way.
Thank you. And you have a fantastic quote that made me think and also resonate with me. So I want to start off with that one. It is, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. What does that bring up in you?
Carl Rogers, the one that wrote that quote, is just an amazing guy. He has a background in therapy, and a lot of the concepts that a lot of therapists abide by, such as non-judgmentalness, acceptance of the person that I'm walking with, and just like positive regard for the person I'm walking with. And so a lot of those pieces can be brought toward ourselves, being non-judgmental toward ourselves, being able to accept ourselves, being able to have positive regard toward ourselves, unconditional positive regard. And so for me, that quote means when I am able to see all my flaws, all my faults, all the things that I'm going through, working on, all my different experiences, and see where I'm at right now without trying to control where the direction needs to go, then I can start to make certain changes. If I can see myself just as I am in my essence, in my being, where I'm at spiritually, where I'm at in different ways, mentally, emotionally, I can start to make the changes. I don't have to beat myself up before I make the changes. That's what the quote means to me a little bit.
Oh, that's a good one, especially the last tiny bit that you said. I don't have to beat myself up in order to make the changes. Because whenever I, for myself, or just talk to other people, notice when there is, I want to do something different, I want to change. But quite often, before that happens, before anything happens, is that I pull myself down. Like, oh, I haven't done this yet. I should have known that. I should be different already. And that quote is, I think, so helpful because, like, one of the biggest pieces that I quite often give to others and give to myself is first, just creating the awareness of what is happening is already the change. If you really understand and see what's happening right now and can truly see it, right, without wanting to change it already because you don't like it, then that is already change in itself.
Yes, that's a good point,
Yeah.
Julian. We fail to recognize the changes already happening within ourselves. We're looking for maybe that really big change that's going to happen down the road, and change is one of the ultimate constant transactions in our lives that's always happening. So I think that's a really good point. And you use the word should, like I should be at this place. I'll never get to this place. The tyranny of the shoulds, as it's called. And that can be an ultimate trap for us. And by being able to look at that from a different perspective where I gain clarity through the process, I don't have to have the clarity at the beginning
Yeah.
and then it fleshes out. It's a different outlook.
Yeah, and I even had a guy on the show a couple episodes back, Alex, and he had a quote with the shoulds, which means if you continue shoulding yourself or using should, you're essentially in resistance with reality, because every time you say should, it is you want things to be different than they actually are right now, right here. And so that's almost like paradoxical. It doesn't make any sense because you want it different than it is.
Yeah, I like that quote too. We're trying to fight whatever reality is, whatever's coming at us, and that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
you are a counselor and a therapist in Canada, and you worked extensively also with addiction simultaneously. Had a lot of experience now, 2 black belts in martial art. And so that is, I think, where the base also of your book is essentially written on the martial art of recovery. A catchy title, I love it. And what I think is coming in there, and I only dabbled a little bit with martial art myself, but the basics that I understood and learned when I did a little bit of Aikido and a little bit of Kung Fu, very tiny, but all of the teachers that I had there were, first of all, so balanced. They were in such a harmonious state most of the time. They like nothing could shake them really strongly. And also one chapter of your book is also about balance. And so what, especially when you look at, maybe you can start with martial art, but then also in some sort of addiction or some sort of difficulties that we are, what kind of role does balance play?
When it comes to addiction, is that the one that you'd like to maybe look at
Both,
first?
actually. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You
Both?
can just start
When
with
it comes,
either. Yeah.
okay, martial arts and addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with martial arts, balance comes in when we do different stances, different forms. Balance is really important when someone's performing what's called a kata, and a kata is it's like a dance routine. So like a choreographed dance routine where I'm doing different moves, and it's all by rote memory. But balance is very important for that, especially in different competitions, which I did not like going to competitions when I was younger. I didn't do competitions when I did American Kempo and a little bit of Jiu-Jitsu. So balance with that. There's also balance between, and this kind of goes into addiction and just mental health treatment as well, but balance between like assertiveness. So not being passive, but not being aggressive. Because when sparring, I can't be overly aggressive in sparring because there needs to be some self-respect toward me and respect toward the person I'm sparring with. Yet I can't be passive either. And that was my struggle when I was doing martial arts, especially looking at 16 to 18 years old. I had to be pushed to become a lot more assertive,
Mm-hmm.
not to where I wanted to, you know, drop kick everybody in a very aggressive way, but I did want to be overly placid either. So there is that part. There's also a balance between Well, it's a balance between the other person and myself. So I'm not all just focused on, and this kind of goes into addiction a little bit more so, but mental health treatment as well. I'm not just enmeshed with them, but I'm not just looking at myself either in a selfish way. So it's finding the balance between us, which can help foster connection.
That's interesting. So not only in the addiction itself, but in the treatment way between you as the counselor and the person with the addiction.
Yes, yes, because I have to be looking at, what's going on inside of me. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I sensing? Is there any past experiences for me coming up with this? Maybe there's previous clients, people I've worked with, other folks, their experiences coming up. So I have to be definitely observant of that. And I also need to be focused on the person I work with, obviously. So it's trying to find that balance where I'm not just focused on them and I'm totally like a robotic, like a robotic, you know, observer, like listener, and I'm not really sensing what's happening for me.
Yeah.
So
So
there,
what a lot
yeah,
of the AI is trying now, like just sitting there, like AI therapists trying now, to like just listen, observe, but don't show any facial expressions, be there, be fully present. Yeah, I get that. Okay.
yeah. And I started listening to it, reading an article that a therapist wrote about AI and how the possibility of it seeping into mental health treatment and, you know, AI robots being used as therapists with these binary instructions to display empathy. And it just boggled my mind that that could be possible. Uh, it's very eerie and that would be very scary to sense. Anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
just a
and
random side note.
yeah,
Yeah.
and some of the models are actually quite good in writing already. So if you write down some of your thoughts and just what is bothering you at that moment, then they can be really good at distilling like patterns, at like limiting beliefs, at some sort of false logic in there. And it's so fascinating that it's possible that they can see that. And at the same time, as you said, eerie or a bit weird, because it's not real human that, at least as we understand now, can really perceive what is happening. They really understand what's going on in your thoughts. But yeah,
Yeah.
still kind of somewhat there.
And for that response that's given, Julian, it's like, is that, is there a balance there with the AI? Are they just focused on what I'm giving, or is it all about the internal responses the AI is given? I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about, and I'm not sure. I really don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tricky one, and I actually don't know really in which direction I feel there. But yeah, we'll have to deal with that and figure out a way maybe. Uh, but coming back maybe to the aspect of balance, because I find that generally a really wholesome topic or theme, let's say, because when it comes to addiction, and I would count it also for myself, for example, the addiction to social media or some sort of, behavioral addiction that I constantly have to check it, or that there is this need when I feel lonely or bad or sad that I grab it because it's my coping mechanism to some extent. And when it comes to that is, I feel like there's also a balance between how much is fine, how much of that usage is fine, and how much is too much. And there's not really a right or wrong answer, but it's again a sort of balance between, is that supporting you and your life in the way you want it, or is it not? And maybe you can also speak a little bit from other addictions to that.
I believe even taking that example before going into other
Mm,
manifestations of addiction, with the social media example, it's what is the intentionality? What is my motive or intention behind the frequency of usage? What is my intention with the usage itself? And I think that can give us a really good guide for where I'm at with the balance. Like,
Mm.
what is my intent behind it? Is it to connect with other people? Like, am I doing this social media for escape, for relief from something that's going on in my life, or for some type of excessive reward that gets to a place where I'm losing myself? And I think that's a really good way to really gauge where I'm at with something like that. As far as other manifestations, yeah, we could talk about alcohol or gambling or workaholism or over shopping or even addiction involving relationships. So yeah, there's lots of different possibilities that we could speak about.
Yeah. And so I think then the interesting part there is there's this balance, and I think in all addictions like that, for some there's a balance, but then also it comes in there the point because to some extent these substances or behaviors or I guess social media is more like a behavioral thing, is that there is a level of self-control in there, or like if you know that this is more of addiction, it's not serving your purpose, that the one that you selected, then and you're still doing it, there's some sort of thing that you're not controlling, or you don't have discipline to be able to do that. And I think you spoke also in the book quite a bit about what you learned from martial art about self-control and discipline, and how that then plays into addiction. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So with self-control, that definitely went in when I was doing sparring, when we were practicing techniques on one another, because when we were practicing techniques, we often did not have any sparring gear on. Even when we sparred, we usually didn't have any leg gear. When I did Wado when I was a preteen, we did have leg gear, these foamy uh, parts for the leg. So when it comes to self-control, it's all about, can I gauge, can I find the place where I need to stop as far as my motion so I don't hit the person,
Hmm?
right? Or I don't do a blow, or I don't do some type of hit that's going to hurt them. And so that's a part with self-control. And another part with self-control is emotionally being able to control, not becoming, not taking it personal, not becoming overly aggressive, not assuming someone is doing something for the worse. Because most of us there know each other and we have respect for one another. And so there's that to consider. And with self-control when it comes to addiction, I mean, that's a huge part. It's one of the biggest parts. And unfortunately for people, when they do partake of a substance, maybe they take that first drink. If they have a concern there, like a major concern, then the control it's out the window usually. Like, it's hard to really claw back because then they want more, they want more. They want something else. I do one gambling slot machine, I'm going to do some more. The brain circuitry has been activated.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's not true for everybody. Some people are, it depends on where someone's at on the spectrum.
Yeah. And then when it comes to the martial art, what were some experiences where you learned really, or is it more like over time where you found this place of self-discipline and self-control? And how has that played out in your life? Like, what were the benefits of actually having that?
I'll tell you a place where it didn't happen, but then after this situation, I became more cognizant, and they became cognizant to me when I was quite young. I was at a sparring tournament, well, a tournament where I was sparring, and this is mentioned in the book. I was sparring a young man who was same age as me, same dojo. Even after the match was over, we were punching and kicking. I think we even went outside of the ring and actually continued. Like, we lost ourselves. And that situation taught me I need to I need to have more self-control, and also need to have more self-respect for myself and respect for the other person that I'm working with, I'm sparring with. Now that can, as you mentioned, yeah, there is a gradual progression when it comes to control. That control is definitely not something that was innate for me. That control was something that was learned.
Hmm.
And so that was something that had to be gradually worked on And even in my life now, when it comes to knowing what I can and cannot control, if we want to bring in the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's being able to know the delineation of what I can and cannot control. And that's an ever evolving process.
Mm, yeah, that's such a good. I didn't know it was a prayer. I only knew it as a quote, really. To that is really the hardest part. That we have control over some things. We have no control over others. But there's this most important part that's like, how do I know which one is which? And I think there we so often with the I speak for myself. I so often lose myself in the things I don't really have control over. Right? We focus on the results that we want to have at the end. I don't know, the certain amount of money or how the person feels at the end or all of these things. And we don't. I can only have control over the input that I give right now, right here in this moment. And so that's such a big thing to discern. What can I actually do and change, and what can't I? In the context of addiction, what comes to your mind when there are things that you can control and things you can't? And I think just for the purpose of my listeners and myself, let's use again maybe the example of social media, because I think it's a prevalent one and an ever growing one at the moment. So what are the things that we can control, and what are things that we can't control in that context?
I feel like, Julian, we can. Yeah, just a moment. I just had to take a drink of water there. We can attempt to control the amount of time that we spend on social media, the frequency. We can control the environment as much as possible. So, like, where do I place my phone? Where do I place my computer? Is it going to be in a high traffic area where I'm going to be more prone to want to get on the computer or on my laptop or whatever it is, an iPad? Can I look at what's going on inside of myself, and I can make the choice, which can involve control since I have a choice. I can make the choice maybe to do soothing activity, like a little bit of meditation, like we did, earlier before our official chat on the podcast. We can look at who are we spending time with. We have a control element there. Am I spending time with people that remind me of social media? Maybe they're constantly on their phones, so there's that to consider as well. I remember this commercial, and this family of four is at a dinner table. The two teenage kids are on their phones, and the husband, the father, reaches underneath the table and takes a typewriter and puts it on the table really hard and just starts to type out. And then everyone looks at him. They stop looking at their phones and they're like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm typing a letter to a friend," or whatever he says. And they're like, "Okay." So, because he has no control over what they're doing at the table, really. But he has the ability to do that for him. And so it's looking at the element of choice. Where do we have choice?
And when it comes to, I feel especially that, but I'm pretty sure it's also with other addictions, is there's this element of being unconscious, of not noticing that pattern or this behavior that you're doing. At least with a phone, it's ever present. It's always somehow in reach. And when I at some point don't feel good, have some time, have some boredom, have something, right? Some ability to check my phone. It just happens. I just find myself back in this moment of, oh wait, now I spent already 15 minutes here. I didn't even notice starting it or picking it up. And what can you say about that element of those unconscious patterns, unconscious behaviors that just lead us to those moments, and yeah, how does that how do you usually help someone with those patterns?
You bring up a really good point, Julian, as far as the mindlessness that happens when it comes to social media, the use of cell phones, electronics, technology. Mindfulness, I believe, is a key component when it comes to, well, martial arts, when it comes to recovery from addiction, when it comes to any type of mental health concern. And so we're looking at, yeah, how can I become more mindful is one big piece of my thoughts, my feelings, my behaviors, what I'm sensing in my body. And yes, there's mindfulness based stress reduction. There's the work of John Kabat-Zinn. There's lots of different outlets to be able to tap into the mindfulness. And mindfulness is just like martial arts, is a way of life. It's a way of looking at life. And I believe that's a big key component when it comes to working on the relationship with the self, is mindfulness.
Hmm. Okay, so it's actually it's awesome that you say it's in actually many fields. So it's also in martial arts. It's also in the way of life, essentially, not just dealing with addiction or trying to improve your situation right now, but it's at least how I view it, it's bringing more awareness to the present moment. And through that, you gain the ability to choose and do something different or the same, whatever you choose, but you have more choice essentially because the quote from Viktor Frankl comes to my mind. Between the stimulus and the response, there's a gap, and in that gap lies your freedom. And I feel like mindfulness or awareness can expand this gap a little more, so you see them, and then actually can make that choice whenever you only see that, right?
I love Viktor Frankl. Man's Search for Meaning, amazing book. Some people don't like the second part because it's all about logotherapy, the therapy he created. But I love, of course, as a therapist, I love the entire book. The first part, the first half is just what he went through in the concentration camps. I mean, yeah, just a phenomenal, well, activist, advocator for mental health, therapist. Yeah. So when it comes to awareness and mindfulness, very important for martial arts. If we think about, metaphorically speaking, addiction being an opponent,
Mm-hmm.
then I have to be aware of my surroundings. The opponent may come at any time. And so awareness and mindfulness around, what am I sensing, thinking, feeling? Because a lot of triggers, people, places, and things in my environment can be catalysts that can come upon me. And so it's being mindful of those three. And I like to add a fourth one that, when we look at AA or NA, any of the support groups, Alcoholics Anonymous, etc., they talk about playgrounds, playthings, playmates, people, places, things. Yet
Mm.
there's also the fourth one that I like to bring up, ideas. And we can't necessarily control when an idea comes in, perhaps. Yet we have control over what do we do with that idea when it comes up. The idea that maybe I can have that testing of drinking today and see where I'm at,
Mm.
which is not going to benefit me. So it's being mindful and being aware of those ideas that are popping up, and actually, because I am aware and mindful of what's happening in my body with those ideas, I can challenge them. I can challenge that opponent.
And when you speak of ideas, it feels like it's almost similar or the same as thought. Is for ideas, is there a difference to thoughts that we have, things we think about, or is it the same thing for you, thoughts and ideas?
I put it in a, I mean, they definitely could be seen as similar. I put that in a different bracket because of how prevalent and how pervasive and how outreaching the ideas can be for somebody when they're struggling with addiction or if they're in active recovery. It's like something that'll get in their head, like a splinter in the soul, and will just generate, you know, like I can go check out how this friend's doing that maybe I need to have more boundaries with. They're not going to be the best person to hang out with, maybe.
Yeah.
moving forward in my recovery. But the idea, it starts to settle, and it can be really hard to move out of that idea.
Okay, so an idea is, as far as I understand now, it's a bit more grounded thought, not just a fleeting thing that you see once or experience once, but a more pervasive, more continuous idea, continuous thought that stays in your mind. Something like that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, like that. Yeah, like the Inception movie,
Yeah.
like where they place that idea into the guy's mind, to sell the company. So,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, fascinating. Remember that. And I think now it's also interesting now to look at um, how your path was first to martial art, but then also how did you cross the path to addiction? And that's seemingly right now a big chunk of your work and your focus on. So can you bring that or share that life part of it, your life a little bit?
yeah, I can speak a little bit about how I came into the addiction work for sure. And so I was doing work in Mississippi in the United States as a mobile therapist. I would go to people's homes and speak with them in their homes, which was always interesting. Saw a lot of different environments that way and got to meet people in their house where they lived. And I also did clinic work at a clinic, outpatient wise. And there came a point, Julian, where I was told I was not billing enough Medicaid.
Mm.
And in the United States, I'm supposed to bill Medicaid. That's how a lot of clinics get paid, is through insurance. And I was sat down in my, just a higher up's room in the main office, and I was told, you're either going to, get another position, or you're going to be let go. Like, we're going to fire you. And I was like, well, I want to continue to work. And so my supportive supervisor, Sheila, she advocated for me to start working at what's called the Chemical Dependency Complex, which is a inpatient treatment facility.
Mm-hmm.
I had next to no experience with addiction at that time. I had a quasi interview about 10 months, no, about over 2 years before getting this position. The person asked me, what's your experience? I said, nada, zero, nothing. And now they placed me into this facility. And my first day was pretty hectic. I had I don't know, 2, 3 sessions, a few intakes. I had to do a psychoeducational group, and my head was definitely like, "Oh, we're in trouble. This is a lot." And so I didn't have any course. I didn't have any training. I mean, I had a lot more training with mental health, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety. And then I started to do the work there at the Chemical Dependency Complex, and yeah, I mean, it was for the 10 months I was there, because then I went to New Zealand after the 10-month stint, uh, at a friend's request, to go to New Zealand for actually a spiritual emergency, that he was having, that I could help with, my wife and I. Yeah, for that 10 months I was working there and inpatient, and I learned so much. But then after coming to Canada, I saw how much I didn't know. And of course, the more I learned, the more I realized. The more I learn, the more I realize, the more I don't really know.
Mm.
Yeah, which is the paradox for us all. So that's a little bit on the
Yeah.
background, and it's just the transformations that I've seen with folks is amazing. It's it's awesome. And unfortunately, there's been some heartbreak too, because addiction, whether we see it as a habit or a disease or, you know, a moral failure, which I definitely don't believe in, but some people do see it that way, brings a lot of shame. But whatever way we see it, addiction, it can bring, well, it can bring death, it can bring destruction, it can bring total disconnection from the self. And I've experienced that with people as well, where they weren't able to come to a place of peace.
And you just mentioned the system in which you were working also before you got to the addiction field. And I, as a European, don't really understand what is going on in the US with all the medication. Can you lighten or uncover that a little bit for me? because you just said there is a sort of incentive for you to prescribe medication. How does that really play out, and in what way is that maybe also not the right approach? There's already a judgment in there. In what way is that the approach working for you, or isn't it?
Well, when it comes to addictions, Suboxone, methadone, those different medication-assisted treatments, MATs, they can help when it comes to opiates. I believe, though, when it comes to any type of medication, whether it's for mental health or addiction, like, what is my purpose for taking? What is my intent? What's the frequency going to be for this medication? How long do I want to be on this medication for? It needs to be a supplement rather than the primary, I was going to say like primary directive. That sounds like Star Trek, but yeah, the prime directive. But yeah, it needs to be looked at as something that's not the main focal point for folks.
Mm.
Now, I will say the caveat when it comes to ADHD that methylphenidate, drugs like Vyvanse, they may need to be taken for a long time, like long term, because that's one of the main treatments for ADHD. Yet, when someone can do different strategies for themselves holistically, because pills don't give skills, then we start to see that the medications maybe don't need to be relied on as much.
Mm.
So that's my quick version. I'm very aversive to telling people, hey, you need to get on Strattera for the ADHD or Vyvanse or Adderall or whatever, or this person needs to get on a benzodiazepine for anxiety. I'm very, because of what I've seen in the States, and you're asking about my experience in the country there.
Yeah.
I mean, some people were on anti-anxiety pills for years, which was just astounding, like 10 plus years at a really high dosage. And to try to withdraw, to come off of those, taper off, would be challenging for a lot of folks.
So there's actually then the aspect in there that they're sort of addicted to the medication that helped them with anxiety.
Yes.
So I guess, was there then the long-term plan that they stay on the medication, or because that doesn't really make sense in my head if they get the medication to, I don't know, to solve a little bit their anxiety issue, but then have an addiction that costs hundreds of something a year. I don't know how expensive they are. Probably not cheap.
Yeah, they're not expensive. Somebody told me here in Canada that the ADHD medication that is taken for this particular person is $500 per like 80 or so pills. Thankfully, with insurance, it's like around 80. However, looking back in the States, when I was doing the work, I was pretty green back then. I thought, my mindset was, this person needs to be on this medication because they have this mental health concern. But as the years have gone on, I've come to realize, a little bit more experience, still learning, I still make mistakes, that, oh, okay, like this person does not need to necessarily be on this long term, their entire life. And yeah, so there can be a dependency or an addiction physiologically and psychologically to these medications, which is very unfortunate.
And I think that gives a little bit of a picture, but like it's, I think, really a bit difficult for me to really wrap my head around that this is being practiced continuously without, like, it feels just like a rigged system that the financial incentive is just so powerful that I guess then you were almost fired because you were not prescribing enough medication, which is a little bit insane to me, because like, if that's the incentive that you prescribe more medication, then eventually you will probably do that, or a lot of people at least do that to keep their jobs or to raise up the ranks or something. And then it's not the best interest is not in the patient then.
It's not. It's not. And just as anecdote, I can't prescribe medication personally.
Hmm.
However, like medical doctors, yeah, they may not, if they don't prescribe, then they may not, especially if they have a pharmacy in their private practice, and they won't get that money,
Yeah.
and then the pharmacist, they won't get their piece of the pie. For me, the reason why I was told, "Hey, you're not billing enough Medicaid," is because I was not seeing enough people frequently with Medicaid, and so that has its own problem. I needed to go see somebody X amount of times, regardless of whether it was treatment appropriate for them or not.
Mm.
Maybe they only needed to see me every 2 weeks, but no, you got to see them, every week, Eric, or every, twice a week, and it's just milking that cow. Um, so it is a major concern in the States when it comes to pharmaceuticals. The Greek word for pharmaceuticals, pharmakeia, actually denotes sorcery if you actually look at the word in the Greek. One of the words that it translates to is sorcery. So when you get that in your mind, you're like, oh, okay.
Hmm.
Is there other possibilities? Kind of like passion flower when it comes to anxiety. I can take passion flower for anxiety, and it's an herb. It's a natural supplement. And it's funny that I learned that from an integrative psychiatrist in the States. Most psychiatrists are not as holistic as an integrative psychiatrist, yet there are some out there
Hmm.
that branch out.
Yeah,
So
to really see the broader picture, not just the direct learnings from maybe the university or how the system is done, but like it sounded like the bit more a meta perspective of understanding what is going on, and then seeing also other possibilities as other than just the obvious and prominent pharmaceuticals. Yeah.
yeah, can we just not go from A to B? I like you saying the meta perspective. What can we look beyond
Yeah.
the system as it is? Is there other holistic possibilities for anybody that we work with?
Yeah. And you just mentioned in a side sentence, but I have to pick it up that you went to New Zealand for a spiritual emergency, you called it. I
Yes.
am curious, so tell me more.
My wife and I had just gotten married about 10 months ago, and it's funny because the cake that we got for where I worked at that rehab, it was, congrats on taking the plunge, but they forgot to put the E on the cake, so it was congrats on taking the plung. So that was all. That's pretty funny. And so 10 months later, I get a Zoom call with a friend in New Zealand. I hadn't seen him in years, and he updated me on a spiritual situation that's happening there in the church that we were both a part of. And I said, sure, I'll come and help out. I left my job at the rehab, at the inpatient treatment center. I left furniture behind at the rental house. I told my landlord we're leaving the country. I left 2 cars behind, and I told my parents, if you could just please take care of these, you're welcome to sell them, which we ended up doing. And yeah, we went to New Zealand for 15 months
Oh,
and
wow.
had had no idea what was going to happen with that. It was the most amazing experience. I would not take that back for the world. They got 3 Kiwis there, the fruit, the people, and the bird. And so, it's the people there, it's just amazing. And just the landscapes there, amazing. And just great spiritual experience for my wife and I. We were able to, learn more about each other and grow spiritually with one another and help out this group of folks in a church that needed some help. We did house church when we were there for the most part, so just met in their people's homes, and um, it was great to see my friend again, his family again. We stayed in like 7 different places. Stayed with South Africans and a British lady, and we house sat, yeah, different places. So we cat sat, yeah. So got to see a lot of the country that way by moving to different locales on the North Island primarily.
Oh, that's interesting. But um, what was the spiritual emergency?
In the church that I'm a part of, it's to the outside observer, it may seem like, really, that's an issue, or that's, quite mundane sounding. So, interestingly, it was about alcohol. So, there is certain belief system that alcohol cannot drink whatsoever. Like, even if you don't have a problem with it, like you can't drink it.
Mhm.
It would be considered a sin. And then there's another viewpoint, which was my friend's viewpoint, that, okay, well, we can drink alcohol, yet we don't need to go to the place of like debauchery and revelry and social drinking where maybe it's out of control.
Mhm.
And so he was actually getting ostracized. Uh, he was getting kind of put to pasture by a certain portion of people that he had known for a long time. And I have nothing against anybody on either side. It's merely just the atmosphere of what produced that, unfortunately. And yeah, so I came there to help support because they broke away and they started to do their own worship. And uh, yeah, I helped out with the house church doing like, you know, leading singing and prayer and, doing little lessons and stuff. So
Mm,
yeah.
okay. So you left everything behind before and then just went to your friend's help. And in that sort of a little conflict that they had between, okay, what opinion is right or is acceptable. That's quite brave to leave everything behind and just go there and do, I guess, be in service of that situation.
Took a lot of bravery, of course there was a doubt, what's this gonna look like? How's this gonna go? And there was a lot of, I'm not usually of that mindset. My wife is usually the one that tells me like, hey, do this or consider this. My personality probably plays into that. I'm pretty laid back, as you no doubt have picked up on, Julian. And uh, so to do that was a big growing piece for me.
Yeah.
Um, And I think just even us talking about earlier, not having all the clarity or all the information at the beginning, I definitely did not. And how I went through the process, the learning came as I went through the 15 months.
Wow. What was one of the biggest learnings for you from that 15 months?
We can have different opinions and still be civil. We can have different viewpoints on something and still be able to come into fellowship and connection and service to one another. And that's between my wife and I primarily because we went through the Bible. We did the who, what, when, where, and why throughout the entire Bible, and we did not see eye to eye on everything. It's interesting when someone goes through that. Two different perspectives. Finding out that unity does not mean we have to agree on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Unity, I learned is, yeah, we can have different opinions, different outlooks, and still come to a place of understanding and not, bite each other's heads off.
That's very useful in a especially relationship. Men, and I think
Yeah.
it's also such a deep learning actually to see like you have the same piece of paper and the same text in front of you. You look at it from the same angle and the same lighting, and you interpret it differently. You see different things in it. So the,
Yes.
let's say, objective truth, the piece of paper or the text is there, but each of you have their own truth or their own reality. Yeah. And I think
Yes.
that's so fascinating because it's so important to see, and with the person that's very close to you, right? You've talked for hours, you like each other, and yet there's those different views. And I think if you extrapolate that even further, like when you don't know someone and you have the same situation or the same thing happening to you, and of course you will see it differently, but yet you can still be civil with each other and yeah, just accept that person as they are at that moment.
Yes. Yes. In that moment, for that time that we're together, that specific time slot, I think that, yeah, we could look at that text and as you mentioned, extrapolate, interpret, look at something maybe entirely different. And through that, I was able to see like, different viewpoints that actually helped me grow. Um, Going back to martial arts, there's different ways to do a technique. There's different options for how I defend myself. Okay, so this person wants to do a sword hand to the throat rather than a punch to the solar plexus. Okay, that's what they would like to do. Maybe that's something I would like to try as far as practicing the technique. And so, yeah, it's something I think that is even in the recovery realm, going into flexibility, going into seeing different viewpoints. I've worked with people that wanted to only maybe cut back and do harm reduction with drinking or something like that, and that was useful for them. And then I've seen people that needed to be abstinent, and then what happened in New Zealand helped me, looking at it now, helped me to be able to be more flexible and say, you need to be abstinent. That's the only way. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's not something that they necessarily have to do. Maybe they do harm reduction and then abstinence. So it's it's something that's opened my mind up.
Yeah, it sounds to me also a little bit. I don't know if it's also popular in US or Canada, but acceptance and commitment therapy. So
Yes.
this notion of the psychological flexibility that I don't have to be rigid with the way I look at the world right now, because as we just figured, there's maybe some objective truth, maybe not. Who knows? But we all have different perceptions of whatever is out there. And so, and it quite often is merely a representation of what's internal, right? We get input from outside, run it through our internal systems on the filters that we have to perceive the world. And then we have a notion or something that we guess we see. And I think that's so opening because it gives the possibility to, first of all, I am wrong. Second of all, the other person might also be wrong. And third, we can still be close together or don't have to fight each other about any of the perceived notions that we have in our minds.
Yeah, that's a great point you bring up, Julian, that, yeah, we could both be wrong, and we don't have to get into a fight on this perceived notion of what is right or wrong. Psychological flexibility with ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is a huge part with emotional regulation. So important. We can even go into cognitive diffusion. I'm not even sitting on the train anymore when it comes to my thoughts. I'm not the conductor, I'm not a passenger. I'm an observer. And when I can start to observe what I'm thinking, which is not an easy task. It's something that has to be constantly cultivated. Still working on that. Yeah. Just an FYI for everyone.
Yeah.
It's something that we constantly work on. We can start to see, oh, all right, I'm observing that this is what's happening in my body. I'm talking with somebody in a heated discussion and this is coming up. Okay. I need to observe that, not let that dictate I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah. And a random clip comes back into my mind from I think the author of *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*. Try to pronounce his name correctly. Yuval Harari, I think. And what he said was that we don't have fights and wars over resources. Usually we have fights about ideas or notions or preconceptions that this person might be wrong or they're not allowed to have this, just these ideas. Essentially what we said right in the beginning of the conversation. Not thoughts, maybe, just fleeting thoughts, but ideas that are a bit more persistent. We fight over those things because somehow we have this idea that the other person has to have our perception, our notion on how to look at things. And we do have wars about these things, right? So it's a really, really huge influence. Like when we say, I think when I say those things in the sessions that I have, they seem so small. I'm just teaching one person to, like, when there's a thought coming up, when there's emotion coming up, maybe just, calm, just try to observe it without reacting instantly. And that's just a small thing, but if you extrapolate it again, you have this thing that people do a war about those ideas, about those thoughts that pop up in some minds at some point.
I hear you saying that it can be used for good or it can be used for something not so good, like a war.
No,
Yeah,
yeah, it should be
yeah.
used for good, but yeah.
It's like the war for independence when it comes to the United States and Britain. The idea of being free from servitude with taxation, that being one of many things, and that led to a war, the Civil War in the States. Ideas there. Yeah, so I feel that's a great treatment intervention is simply the noticing of thoughts, like you said, and just cultivating that, be mindful of that, working on that. It's a huge game changer. When it comes to recovery from addiction, going back to that topic, recovery is an inside job, like it's a mind change. It's a change from addictive thinking or not letting the addictive thinking run prevalent out loose to coming to a place where I notice that addictive thinking and I'm more observant of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That feels like a building block, a fundamental piece of it. And when it comes to any form of sort of addiction, where does the internal struggle play a role, or the mind, the thoughts that we have about it? Because I can imagine you talk a lot about that with your clients. Like, what are they struggling with? What are the thoughts that maybe create some doubt? Will I be able to finally get off the addiction? I assume a lot of people are struggling with that, go back and fall back into old patterns. So what are some thoughts that come up, and do those people tend to be quite worrisome usually? Is that right to assume?
At someone's darkest moments in addiction, the quote I've heard is, I don't want to die, but I'd rather not live. It's a slight difference than depression, because with depression, if someone is in a suicidal state, it's really, I want to die, you know, there is this notion there. So shame is a huge component when it comes to people heavily in addiction. Shame, guilt, regret, remorse. That paints a person's psyche when it comes to shame with addiction. And Vicky Underland Rowe, I think that's her name, she wrote a book called Spiritual Suicide. And spiritual suicide is denoted as shame. And that term could be used when it comes to someone that's in the throngs of heavy addiction.
And what is usually helpful to deal with that? So when think about, you could, I guess you have most experience maybe with alcohol or any substances, but I think that also applies then to people with vastly different addictions too. What are some tools that you give people usually to overcome these thoughts or to deal with that in those moments? What can one do?
Cultivating self-love is a primary component when it comes to shame. And part of cultivating that self-love is finding my tribe, finding those people I can belong with, finding people I can relate to that have been through similar experiences. Shame thrives in isolation. Guilt thrives in isolation. Being able to come to a place where I'm not isolated, I'm doing activities that do bring some joy, a lot of joy, at least a little bit, because shame can really crush the possibility of joy, but at least starting to do those, we call it hedonic rehabilitation, doing those different activities that give pleasure, that can help, especially when I'm with people. That would be a really core component when it comes to dealing with shame, is being able to talk about it, not beating myself up, finding people, kind of going back to Carl Rogers with the beginning quote we did, people that can accept me for who I am, people that are non-judgmental toward me, people that have this unconditional positive regard toward me. And by seeing that toward me, I can start to build that within myself.
I think that's a great rounding now that you mentioned also the beginning quote again. If there is someone resonating with the way you speak, with the way you combine martial art and an addiction or some sort of, in general, just like mental wellness, I would say, where can they best find you?
They can find me, I'll try to make it brief. So Recovery Arts Counseling, just typing that in, 2 L's for those that are in the States if you're listening, because the States, they think that they're, we got it right with 1 L, 2 L. So Recovery Arts Counseling on Instagram, Facebook,
Okay.
LinkedIn, same. Yeah, they can find
All
me.
right. Then I put all of these in the show notes. And obviously, if you want to dive deep into the techniques that we only scratched on the surface for now, but diving deeper into that, they're in very detail described in the book, the martial art of recovery. So there is also a link in the show notes to that book, and I am very thankful for Eric to share his experience, his knowledge around that topic, and I'm thankful for the time that you've given the show.
Thank you so much, Julian. A pleasure to be with you today.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think there's so many aspects in there that I think we aligned a little bit. We touched on similar things, and one of the biggest one was really the understanding that there is maybe some sort of external objective thing out there, maybe, but whoever looks at that, it's they see something different, and I feel like with that perception, with that understanding, and that humbleness as well, that you might be wrong, the other person might be wrong, there might not be actually this truth right there. With that, I think there's a lot of compassion created for yourself, because all the thoughts that you think are true might not be true. And I think that is a great lesson I take from this. So thank you so much for sharing that.
A great lesson for me as well, Julian. You're so welcome.
Awesome. You listened to the full episode. Your investment to a more calm, confident, and doubtless self. Now you can make a commitment to yourself and help others discover this podcast, simply by subscribing and following the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I hope to see you here soon again for the new episode dropping every other Thursday. Talk soon.